So, the second book in the Sharpe series, Sharpe's Triumph, Richard Sharpe and the Battle of Assaye, 1803. This book took me a long time to read, and this video took me a long time to write because, frankly, these videos take ages all the time, and I had a lot of other stuff going on, but I enjoyed this book. I'm just going to come right out and say it. I read most of it while on long car trips and plane trips. I went out of town a lot over the summer, and I was more excited about this book to read it and to finish it than I was about Sharpe Tiger. And I already quite like Sharpe Tiger a lot. And I just think it was better written, better planned. I think the battle isn't as convoluted and complicated, except for like one part of it, which I'm going to talk about later. I think the relationships were better written. I like that they kept building on stuff that we already knew and liked about the characters. Sharpe Triumph is very good, and I'm going to talk about why I think it's good. Before we get into the plot, as we do, I have to mention one funny thing that I've already begun to notice, and it's only the second book in the series that I've read, so it's kind of funny that I'm already noticing it. Sharpe has a lot of girlfriends, we all know this. He has 3 long-term partners over the book series, but Teresa, the first of these, doesn't show up until Sharpe's Gold. Thus, until that point, which is the 8th book, Sharpe has many girlfriends of the week, if you will. The last one he had in Sharpe's Tiger, Mary Bickerstaff, left him to marry an Indian man in the city Sharpe's regiment was sieging. So, anyway, Sharpe's girlfriend in Triumph is a French girl named Simone, and the very first time she shows up, she's not even with Sharpe. She's introduced as the wife of a captain in the camp of the book's villain, and one of the very first things we learn about her is that she has wandering eyes for another younger lieutenant, so her husband is like 20 years older than her. Perfect soup of circumstances for her to be into Sharpe later, in my opinion. But most tellingly, she is the only woman for whom we get an extended paragraph detailing what she looks like, and when I saw that I thought, Sharpe love interest alert, basically. And yes, I'm well aware that this is a convention of the genre, but I'm still going to find it funny. And they do actually end up meeting later in the book when Sharpe goes into the besieged city where she's living and in essence saves her from being gang raped. I like their dynamic, actually. He's very soft and gentle with her, as he is with most women, and I think that's kind of nice of him. It's just another thing that makes him likeable. I hear that Simone runs off with diamonds that he leaves with her, but it didn't happen in Triumph, so I assume it happens in the next book. He probably talks about it then, so we'll have to see what that's about. Okay, now on to the plot. Frankly, I've only read this book once, so I'm just basically going to give a bit of a bare bones rundown in case any of you watching this haven't actually read it yet. Basically, Sharpe has spent the past 4 years prior to this book having a pretty nice life cutting about as a sergeant. He's commanding a small regiment in a small town at the beginning of the book when they get ambushed by a group led by Major William Dodd. We'll talk about him in a second. And Sharpe is the only survivor. He goes back to his main camp where he meets up with Colonel McCandless again from the last book. There's some talk about trying to find whoever did it. Blah, 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 middle. Sharpe and McCandless spend a good portion of the book going around by themselves as the latter gets semi-grievously injured. During this period, Sharpe actually meets Anthony Pullman, who is the employer of William Dodd, and he learned that he can gain a higher rank if he deserts and joins the enemy forces. Unsurprisingly, after some introspection, Sharpe says no. He wants to be a high rank in the British Army, which is a valid start to have. He wants to go back home to England and rub it in everybody's face that he's this big cool soldier now. Wellesley wants to move on the town called Assaye. That's where Pullman is planning to fire on the British Army. I don't know if I pronounced that name correctly. Sharpe ends up close to Wellesley, where the latter is unhorsed and left alone with no protection. Sharpe saves his life and is promoted to officer for his bravery. He becomes an ensign, which he takes great pleasure in because that means he gets to be above Hatesville for once. And I love that for him. And the end page where he finally realizes that is one of the more cathartic endings to a book that I've read in my life. Overall, it's a slightly less convoluted plot than the Sharpe's Tiger one was, and I think I actually enjoyed this more. This one was actually a bit more interesting with all the political intrigue going on. This is the second book, so this might be presumptuous to say, but I'm liking how Bernard Cornwell treats his villains so far. He seemed to subscribe to both overarching villain and monster of the week themes. Sharpe has enduring enemies who always cause him problems, like Hakes will. Having them is a good reminder of what's really at stake for both us as the reader and Sharpe, and until the 16th book, Sharpe's Enemy, wherein Hakes will is killed, finally, he's always there in the background messing with Sharpe and trying to bring him down. Yet, in every separate book, there are villains of the week who are summarily defeated at the end and provide some colour to the series and show the range of adversaries Sharpe faces over his career. And in this book we have Anthony Pullman and William Dodd that I mentioned earlier, the latter of whom deserted the British Army for a majority in Pullman's regiment. Dodd isn't a big bad like Hakeswell is. He hasn't got some personal beef with Sharpe. In fact, they don't even really recognise each other until near the end of the book. He's not working to bring him down or make his life harder. He's just a guy who felt unappreciated and disrespected in the British Army and popped off to find employment somewhere else. Hakeswell luckily doesn't show up very much in this book, which is probably why I enjoyed it so much. So, as I've been saying multiple times, I really did enjoy this book. So I'm going to tell you exactly why I enjoyed it, and we're going to start right at the beginning. First of all, this book jumped right into the action, as Sharpe's Tiger did, and I do actually really appreciate that. Sharpe is playing dead in the ruins of the small town he's been looking after. Everyone, aside from him, has been killed by William Dodd's regiment, and it's very shocking. It really reminds us how violent his life actually is, because in this book there are plenty of moments of downtime where he's not fighting, he's not actively trying to hurt anyone or protect himself, but this is a really good way of showing us that there's always that undercurrent of tension and stress and violence that's going underneath his life, and this part of him playing dead does actually sort of lead on to another thing I liked, is that he's very distressed about this. He's very distressed that the people he's been looking after, who he considered friends, or at least people he enjoyed spending time with, are all dead. And there's a scene there where he's sort of freaking out about all of these people dying, and it makes him likeable. You want to root for someone who cares like that, because even though he's an unashamed thief and a rogue and all of that, he still has the ability to feel human care for others and feel kindness and feel shame and guilt that he wasn't able to protect people. And I just like that Bernard Cornwell has continued that. I talked before in Sharpe Tiger about how that's not really common to see in male protagonists, in my opinion, and it makes you want to read more of him. He's not just a one-sided, one-dimensional military guy. He's got depth, and I do actually really like that. Of course, nothing is perfect, no book is perfect, no piece of media is perfect, and even as much as I enjoyed Sharpe's Triumph, there was still one glaring problem I had with it, which I hesitate to even call a problem because I don't really see how Bernard Cornwell could have gotten around this, but it's a necessary evil. There are so many factions to this war that I had very little idea what is going on, and I do appreciate that this is historically accurate. The conflict in India with the British Empire was multifaceted. There were so many different sides of the war and so many people trying to lay their claim to the land and the resources and just general rule of the country. So it makes sense that there's a lot of different people fighting, but why couldn't they have had a list at the beginning of the book just like giving a little rundown of each of the factions that are going on? Like, we had a map showing like all the different positions of the different armies and how they affected each other, so why couldn't we have had like a list of the people who were fighting? It doesn't really make any sense. Make it make sense, y'all. That's all I'm saying, because I don't fucking know what was going on in that respect. And again, as I said, I don't really know what the author could have done to mitigate this, because to mitigate it would have probably been to skimp on historical accuracy. So it's not really a problem so much as it is just a quibble that I personally have. It definitely didn't dampen my enjoyment of the book. I just had to pay a little bit more attention when I was reading the battle scenes, which is fine. I have to pay attention because I'm writing videos on the book. So ultimately, even though I didn't really like it that much, definitely not enough to make me hate the book by any stretch of the imagination. Overall, to wrap up, I like this book better than Sharp Tiger. I think Sharp Triumph is an improvement, and Sharp Tiger is already a pretty good book if you're reading it as the first in the series instead of like Rifles or whatever. So even though it took me longer to read, purely because I was reading it with the intent of critiquing it and not just for enjoyment as I was with Sharp Tiger, I still enjoyed it more. And the feeling that I get from Triumph is that Bernard Cornwell is kind of getting more into the groove of writing a prequel. He's already changed and retconned what needed to be changed because Sean Bean doesn't really match what Sharpe is supposed to look like, and he's kind of getting more into the groove of writing this new version of Sharpe that has now become canon. He's kind of finally settled into what he wants his main character to start out like, and this certainty, this sure-footedness makes it a lot enjoyable to read as books. And I'm excited for Fortress. I'm going to start reading it soon. I'm excited to see where he goes with it. I'm excited to see what he does and how he develops Sharpe in the lead up to Rifles, which was the first book. Overall, I like Sharpe Triumph very much. 4 out of 5 stars. Thank you for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, I make new videos whenever I feel like it, which is not very often. When I finish Sharpe's Fortress, I'll probably write a video on that one as well. Have a good evening. Thank you.